Welcome to the depths below, echoes of the forgotten, a chilling story of ancient darkness rising beneath the city. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare to enter the forgotten tunnels. The dreams had never stopped. Even weeks after their escape from Station 103, Michael woke each night drenched in sweat, the low rhythmic pulse still beating in his ears. Chloe and Sam said little about it, but the dark circles under their eyes spoke volumes. Something had followed them. Not the creature itself, perhaps, but a piece of the darkness they had disturbed. It lived now in the corners of their lives, subtle and patient. Michael sat at his kitchen table, staring at the city skyline through cracked windows. The radio crackled faintly in the background, news of unexplained tremors and sinkholes spreading like infection. He barely heard it. His phone vibrated on the table, jolting him back. A message from Chloe. "We need to talk, it's getting worse." Michael swallowed hard, feeling the old fear coil in his gut. He thought they had escaped the tunnels. He thought they were safe. He was wrong. The depths were calling again, and this time, they weren't just dreaming. Michael grabbed his jacket and the battered old backpack that had become almost a reflex to carry. The camera sat inside, fully charged. Part of him had wanted to throw it away to destroy anything that tied them back to Station 103, but something stronger had made him keep it. A sense that their story wasn't over. The streets outside were wet from a recent rain. The sky bruised purple and gray. Michael moved quickly, head down, avoiding eye contact with the few people lingering on the sidewalks. It felt like the city was holding its breath. When he reached the small diner where Chloe waited, he found her sitting in a back booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup. Sam was already there too, his face pale, his leg jittering beneath the table. Chloe looked up, her eyes haunted. "It's not just us anymore," she said quietly. "Other people are having the dreams, people who were never near the station." Michael sat down heavily. The darkness wasn't staying hidden, it was spreading. Michael leaned in, lowering his voice instinctively. "What do you mean, other people?" Chloe slid a newspaper across the table. The headline was small, buried deep inside. "Mysterious sleepwalking epidemic baffles doctors." Michael scanned the article. People all over the city, strangers, had been found wandering at night, drawn toward abandoned construction sites, sewer entrances, old subway lines. No memory, no explanation? Sam pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and spread it out, a crude map of the city with shaky red marks scrawled across it. "These are the hotspots," he said. "Every place someone has been found. It's close to the old tunnel systems." Michael stared at the map, a sinking feeling in his chest. The darkness they had escaped wasn't content to stay buried. It was reaching up through the cracks, pulling people toward it. "We have to stop it," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded slowly, even as dread coiled tighter around his heart. The depths weren't done with them yet. They were only just beginning. They sat in silence for a long moment, the noise of the diner fading into the background. Michael traced one of the red marks on Sam's map with his finger. "We start here," he said finally, tapping a location near the riverfront. An old maintenance tunnel marked as condemned years ago. Chloe and Sam exchanged a glance but nodded. They knew there was no turning back. They spent the next hour gathering what they could. Flashlights, spare batteries, walkie-talkies. Michael slipped the camera into his backpack again, feeling its familiar weight. Part of him hated it, but he knew they would need every piece of evidence they could get. As they stepped out into the street, the sky darkened further, heavy clouds churning above the city. Michael caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of a shop window, a dark shape, impossibly tall and thin, watching from across the street. When he turned, it was gone. He shivered. They had poked at something ancient, something patient, and now it was watching them back. The entrance to the maintenance tunnel was hidden behind a chain-link fence, overgrown with ivy and rust. Michael cut through the lock with a pair of bolt cutters, the snap echoing unnaturally loud in the empty street. Chloe pushed the gate open and the three of them slipped inside, the city noise fading behind them. The tunnel mouth yawned before them, a black hole in the crumbling concrete wall. Sam switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path into the darkness. "Feels familiar," he muttered under his breath. Michael adjusted the camera on his shoulder, capturing the decaying entrance, the wet, moldy scent rising from the depths. Chloe led the way, her shoulders tense. The ground sloped downward, the air growing colder with each step. As they moved deeper, the faint sound of dripping water filled the tunnel, a slow, rhythmic plink, plink, plink that seemed almost too regular to be natural. Michael felt the familiar knot of dread tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just another abandoned tunnel. This was something else's territory. The further they moved into the tunnel, the more unnatural it felt. The air was thick, almost syrupy, clinging to their skin. Their flashlights picked out strange markings along the walls. Not graffiti, but deep scratches, spiraling symbols that pulsed faintly when the beams passed over them. Chloe ran her fingers lightly across one, shivering. "They're fresh," she whispered. Michael filmed everything, careful to stay close to the others. The sound of dripping water grew louder, then shifted. Deeper, heavier, almost like a heartbeat buried beneath the ground. Sam paused, shining his light down a side passage that branched off to the right. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice tight. Michael turned just in time to catch a glimpse of movement, a flash of something pale and long sliding into the shadows. Chloe pulled them forward, her voice urgent. "Don't follow it, stay together." They moved faster, the tunnel walls closing in tighter. Behind them, soft, dragging footsteps began to echo, matching their pace perfectly. They were not alone. The tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber lined with rusted metal doors. Some hung ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. Michael swung the camera slowly around the room, capturing every shadow. Chloe moved cautiously to the center, shining her light on the floor. A large symbol had been etched into the concrete. A sprawling, twisted spiral, similar to the marks on the tunnel walls, but far more complex. Sam lingered near one of the doors, peering inside. "These look like old storage cells," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael knelt by the spiral, the hair on his arms rising as he traced the pattern with his flashlight. "It's a summoning circle," Chloe said quietly. "Or maybe a prison." Before Michael could respond, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Frost crept along the walls, their breath misting in front of them. A low whispering sound began to rise from the cracks in the floor. Not words, but something older, hungrier. Michael stood quickly. "We have to keep moving," he said. "Now." They hurried toward a narrow passage on the far side of the chamber, the whispering growing louder behind them. Chloe led the way, her flashlight beam shaking as she moved. Sam stayed close to Michael, constantly glancing over his shoulder. As they squeezed into the passage, the air thickened even more, like walking through water. The walls pulsed faintly under the flashlight beams, as if the tunnel itself were alive. Michael kept the camera rolling, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear. A sudden crash echoed from the chamber behind them, one of the metal doors slamming shut with a deafening clang. Chloe flinched but kept moving. "It's trying to trap us," she said, her voice trembling. The passage twisted sharply downward and the ground became slick with moisture. They slid and stumbled, catching themselves on broken pipes and rough stone. Up ahead, the tunnel widened into darkness. Michael slowed, raising his flashlight higher. Something was waiting in that darkness. He could feel it. Ancient, patient, and aware of their every step. They stepped into the larger cavern, the ceiling lost somewhere above in the gloom. Their flashlights barely illuminated the broken remains of old maintenance equipment scattered around the floor. Rusted pipes, shattered tiles, and a collapsed ventilation shaft. Chloe swept her beam across the far wall, revealing a heavy steel door, almost hidden behind fallen debris. "There," she said, her voice thin. Michael moved closer, camera rolling. Strange black stains ran down the door, and the air grew colder the closer they got. Sam tugged at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Locked?" he muttered. Michael studied the doorframe. Etched deep into the metal were the same spiraling symbols they had seen before, only here they were jagged, violent, almost desperate. He glanced back at the others. "This wasn't meant to be opened," he said quietly. Chloe shivered, stepping back from the door. "Then why does it feel like something's trying to get out?" As if on cue, a low, resonating thud sounded from behind the door, so deep it vibrated through their bones. Chloe gasped and stumbled backward. Sam cursed under his breath, raising his flashlight like a weapon. Michael kept filming, heart hammering against his ribs. Another thud, louder this time. The steel door trembled, dust drifting from the ceiling above. "Move!" Chloe shouted, grabbing Michael's arm. They scrambled back across the cavern just as a hairline crack snaked across the door's surface. Something struck it from the other side, once, twice, relentless. They ducked behind a pile of debris, flashlights flickering. The noise stopped abruptly, leaving an unbearable silence. Michael stared at the camera's small screen, breath held. Slowly the door creaked inward, pushed by unseen hands. From the darkness beyond, a cold wind spelled out, carrying the faint sound of whispering, old and broken, promising nothing but ruin. They didn't wait to see what was coming. Chloe led them through a side tunnel, the walls pressing in closer with each frantic step. Michael tried to steady the camera, but his hands shook violently. The whispers from behind them grew sharper, less like voices and more like something scraping against reality itself. The tunnel twisted and dipped, and suddenly the floor vanished beneath Chloe's feet. She cried out as she slid down a steep slope, disappearing into darkness. Michael and Sam followed helplessly, tumbling after her. They landed hard in a lower passage, the impact knocking the breath from Michael's lungs. He sat up, coughing, his flashlight broken and useless. Chloe groaned nearby, clutching her ankle. Sam swore loudly. "This just keeps getting better," he muttered. Michael pulled the spare flashlight from his bag, its beam revealing a long, narrow hallway lined with old train tracks, half buried in rubble. The air here was even worse, thick with the stench of rot and something chemical, burning the back of their throats. Whatever this place was, it was closer to the heart of the darkness. They limped along the broken tracks, the silence around them thick and oppressive. Every few steps, the ground beneath their feet vibrated faintly, a slow, pulsing beat like a distant heartbeat. Michael kept the camera steady, though every instinct screamed at him to drop it and run. Chloe leaned heavily on Sam, her injured ankle slowing them down. Up ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast underground platform. Ancient train cars sat rusting on the tracks, their windows shattered, interiors gutted. Michael scanned the area with his flashlight, heart sinking. The walls of the station were covered in more of the spiraling symbols, but these were different, sharper, more chaotic, as if whoever had made them had lost control. In the center of the platform stood a broken stone pillar, cracked and leaning. Something about it pulled at Michael's mind, a low hum vibrating in his teeth. Chloe's voice broke through the haze. "We're not alone," she whispered, and in the shadows beyond the ruined train cars, something stirred. They froze, listening. Soft, wet footsteps echoed from the far side of the station. Michael tightened his grip on the camera, sweeping the flashlight toward the sound. A shape moved between the rusted train cars, tall, skeletal, with limbs too long and joints that bent the wrong way. Chloe whimpered under her breath. "Don't run," Michael whispered. "It'll hear us." Sam helped Chloe crouch behind a broken bench, while Michael kept filming. Unable to tear his eyes away from the figure, it moved slowly, methodically, sniffing the air like a predator tracking wounded prey. Michael's flashlight flickered once, drawing the creature's attention. It turned its head sharply, revealing a face that wasn't a face at all, just a gaping black maw where features should have been. Michael's blood turned to ice. The creature hissed low and began moving toward them, its clawed feet clicking against the broken tiles. "Now," Michael breathed. "Move." They bolted, half carrying Chloe between them, weaving through the shattered remains of the station. Michael kept the camera pressed to his chest, its red recording light blinking wildly. Behind them, the creature shrieked, a high, piercing sound that made their ears ring. Sam kicked open the door of a derailed train car, shoving Chloe inside. Michael dove after them, slamming the broken door shut, just as the creature slammed into it with a bone-jarring crash. The walls of the car shook violently, dust pouring down from the ceiling. Chloe huddled in a corner, breathing hard, while Sam braced the door with a rusted metal rod. Michael panned the flashlight across the interior. Rows of shattered seats, broken glass, and something else. Strange carvings etched into the walls, almost glowing faintly in the dark. Protective symbols. Wards. Someone had tried to make this place a sanctuary once. Michael didn't know if it would be enough. But for now, it was the only shelter they had. The creature slammed against the derailed train car again, making the walls groan and shudder. Michael pressed his back against the broken seats, trying to steady his breathing. Chloe wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking slightly. Sam gripped the rusted metal rod against the door with all his strength, his face pale and sweating. For a moment, the creature scratched along the outside of the car, its claws screeching against the metal. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell, heavy and total. Michael waited, counting the seconds, the camera still rolling. After what felt like forever, he risked a glance out a broken window. The platform was empty, no sign of movement. "I think it's gone," he whispered. Sam didn't move from the door. "Or waiting," he muttered darkly. Chloe wiped her face with a trembling hand. "We can't stay here." Michael nodded. The protective symbols etched into the walls were old, fading. He could feel it. Whatever strength they had once held was almost gone. Michael swept his flashlight across the inside of the car, searching for anything useful. Near the back, under a shattered seat, he spotted a narrow hatch partially hidden by debris. He crawled toward it, clearing the rubble away. "There's a service tunnel," he called softly. Chloe limped over, wincing with every step. Sam reluctantly left the door, keeping one eye on the window. Michael pried the hatch open, revealing a dark, narrow shaft leading downward. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of earth and stagnant water. "Better than staying here," Chloe said grimly. One by one, they climbed into the shaft, Michael going last. As he lowered himself down, he felt the train car shudder violently again. The creature had returned, more furious than before. Michael dropped into the darkness, pulling the hatch shut above him just as a deafening crash split the silence. In the narrow, wet tunnel below, they were plunged into darkness once again, the only sound their own ragged breathing. The tunnel was cramped and slick with moisture, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Michael kept the flashlight tucked under one arm, the camera still rolling despite the claustrophobic space. Every scrape of their movements echoed endlessly, as if the tunnel itself were amplifying the sound. Chloe breathed heavily ahead of him, her injured ankle dragging. Sam brought up the rear, muttering curses under his breath. The walls here were different. Not rough stone or crumbling concrete, but smooth and black, almost organic in appearance. Strange veins pulsed faintly just beneath the surface, casting a sickly glow that barely lit the path. Michael tried not to touch the walls as they moved, but the narrow space made it impossible. Each brush sent a cold shock through his skin, like touching something alive. The tunnel forked ahead, one path sloping downward into deeper darkness, the other veering left toward a faint, flickering light. Michael hesitated, heart pounding. Neither path felt safe. But staying where they were wasn't an option either. Michael made the decision quickly. "Left," he whispered, motioning Chloe and Sam toward the faint light. They crawled forward, the walls seeming to pulse faster as they moved. The tunnel widened slightly, just enough for them to stand hunched over. The flickering light grew stronger, revealing a small alcove cut into the wall. In the center stood a stone pedestal, cracked and covered in dust. Resting on it was a rusted metal box, covered in the same spiraling symbols they had seen before. Chloe reached out instinctively, but Michael grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he said. He scanned the box carefully. It vibrated faintly under the flashlight's beam as if responding to their presence. Sam stepped closer, squinting. "Looks like a seal," he said. "Or a key," Michael nodded grimly. Whatever it was, it had been hidden for a reason. but something deep inside him knew they would need it if they wanted to survive what was still to come. Very carefully, he reached out and lifted the box. The moment Michael's fingers touched the box, a deep tremor shuddered through the tunnel, knocking dust from the ceiling. Chloe gasped, stumbling backward. The walls around them seemed to ripple, the veins pulsing faster, brighter. Michael gritted his teeth and pulled the box free from the pedestal. The symbols on its surface flared briefly, then faded to a dull, angry red. "We need to move," Chloe urged. Michael shoved the box into his backpack and they hurried back to the main tunnel. The flickering light behind them dimmed and then vanished completely, plunging them into darkness. They switched on their flashlights again and continued along the passage, every step feeling heavier, slower, as if the tunnel itself were trying to hold them back. Ahead, the air changed. The smell of rot grew stronger, mixed now with something metallic and sharp. Sam covered his mouth with his sleeve. "Whatever's ahead," he muttered. "It's worse than what's behind us." Michael tightened his grip on the camera. He had no doubt Sam was right. The tunnel opened into another cavern much larger than the last. The walls were lined with massive stone pillars, each etched with deep, twisting carvings. At the center stood a massive pit, its edges lined with crumbling stones and twisted metal supports. The stench was overwhelming here, a mix of decay and something far older, almost chemical. Chloe staggered, coughing violently. Michael steadied her, sweeping the flashlight over the pit. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the light whole. Sam approached the edge carefully, peering down. "I can't see the bottom," he said hoarsely. From the depths of the pit, a low, resonating hum rose. The same pulse they had heard before, only now it was stronger, angrier. Michael felt it vibrating through his bones. The box in his backpack grew warm, almost painfully so. He glanced at Chloe and Sam. They all knew it instinctively. Whatever they had disturbed, whatever was waking, they were closer to it now than they had ever been. And it was waiting for them. They circled the edge of the pit carefully, sticking close to the cracked walls. Michael kept the camera aimed toward the darkness, even though some part of him screamed to look away. The low hum grew louder, almost a chant now, a deep vibration that rattled in their skulls. Chloe stumbled, gripping Sam's shoulder for balance. "It's pulling at us," she whispered, voice trembling. Sam nodded grimly, jaw clenched. At the far end of the cavern, they found another tunnel, narrower and steeper than the others. The walls here were slick with moisture, the symbols carved deeper, angrier into the stone. Michael led the way, forcing his legs to move despite the growing weight in the air. Every step felt wrong, like walking deeper into a living thing's throat. As they pushed forward, the box in Michael's backpack pulsed hotter against his spine. He didn't dare take it out, whatever the box was meant to hold. Or to stop. It was reacting now, and the darkness ahead was responding in kind. The tunnels sloped downward sharply, forcing them to slide and scramble over broken rocks. At the bottom, they found themselves in a narrow chamber, walls lined with old rusted chains bolted deep into the stone. Many of the chains were broken. Michael swept the flashlight across the floor and froze. Bones, thousands of them, littered the ground. Human, animal, and things he couldn't name. Chloe covered her mouth, choking back a sob. Sam kicked at a skull, sending it rolling into the shadows. "This was a prison," Michael said hoarsely, "or a feeding ground." The realization settled like a stone in his gut. They had trespassed into something ancient, something with rituals and purposes they couldn't understand, and they were now part of it. From somewhere deeper in the tunnel system, a low rumble rolled toward them, the ground trembling underfoot. Michael tightened the straps on his backpack, feeling the box vibrate harder, almost alive now. They needed to move, quickly. They hurried through the bone-strewn chamber, stepping carefully to avoid the worst of it. The tunnel beyond was narrower, the walls so close that their shoulders brushed the slick stone. The humming sound grew louder with every step, almost deafening. Michael's flashlight flickered as they entered a massive underground hall. Ancient machinery lined the walls, Rusted gears, massive pistons, long-dead generators coated in mold and dust. Chloe swept her light across the room and froze. At the center stood a massive altar made of black stone, etched with spirals and symbols that seemed to squirm under the light. Chains draped the altar, and on top of it lay a figure, humanoid but horribly wrong, with elongated limbs and a face covered in deep scars. It was still, almost like a statue. Michael lifted the camera instinctively, but every part of him screamed to turn away. Chloe grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "That's what the box is for," she whispered. "It's not dead, it's waiting." Michael slowly pulled the box from his backpack. It vibrated violently in his hands, the symbols glowing faintly in the dark. Chloe and Sam stepped back, their flashlights trembling. As Michael approached the altar, the figure atop it stirred slightly. A twitch of long, skeletal fingers, a deep, rasping breath escaped its ruined mouth, and the humming in the room shifted. Faster now, more eager. Michael hesitated, sweat pouring down his back. He didn't know how to use the box. He didn't even know if it would work. But something primal screamed that if they did nothing, whatever slept here would fully awaken. The box grew hotter, searing his palms. Gritting his teeth, Michael placed it on the altar beside the figure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the box cracked open with a sound like shattering wind that extinguished their flashlight. In the pitch darkness, the altar trembled, and the figure screamed. A sound of pure rage, an endless hunger. Michael stumbled backward, shielding his face from the icy wind. The entire cavern shook as the figure thrashed on the altar, its limbs twisting unnaturally. The spiraling symbols carved into the walls began to glow, casting a sickly green light over the room. Chloe grabbed Michael's arm. "It's working," she shouted over the roar. Sam pointed toward the tunnel they had entered through. Cracks were forming in the walls, dust and stones raining down. "But we need to go, now!" Michael hesitated, torn between filming the incredible sight before him and surviving to tell the story. The figure shrieked again, a sound so powerful it seemed to tear the air apart. Tendrils of black smoke poured from its mouth and eyes, wrapping around the altar and the box, pulling it inward. Michael forced himself to move, stuffing the camera into his backpack. Chloe and Sam were already scrambling toward the exit, ducking falling debris. Michael turned for one last look, just in time to see the altar collapse, taking the figure with it into a widening pit of darkness. They ran, the ground buckling and shifting beneath their feet. The tunnel behind them crumbled, massive stones smashing into the path where they had stood seconds before. Michael caught up to Chloe and Sam just as they reached a metal ladder bolted to the wall, leading upward into darkness. Chloe climbed first, her injured ankle slowing her but not stopping her. Sam followed close behind, urging her on. Michael slung the backpack tighter to his body and scrambled up after them, the rumble of collapsing stone growing louder below. As he climbed, the air grew colder and thinner, and the faint pulse they had heard for so long began to weaken. Finally, Chloe pushed open a rusted hatch above them, spilling them into a crumbling maintenance room. They collapsed onto the cracked floor, coughing and gasping for breath. For a moment, none of them spoke. They had survived. Michael lay flat on his back, staring up at the mold-stained ceiling. The hum was gone. The nightmare below was sealed again. Or so he hoped. The maintenance room was silent except for their ragged breathing. Michael sat up slowly, wiping grime from his face. Chloe leaned against the wall, eyes closed, while Sam paced the room, peering nervously at the broken machinery around them. "We did it," Sam said, but his voice lacked conviction. Michael wasn't so sure. He pulled the camera from his backpack and powered it on. The footage was still there, blurry, chaotic, but undeniable proof of what they had seen. Proof they had touched something that should have remained buried. Chloe opened her eyes and looked at Michael. "What do we do now?" she asked. Michael stared at the camera screen, watching the faint flickers of light dancing across it. He didn't have an answer. Outside, somewhere beyond the crumbling walls, the city continued as if nothing had happened, as if a piece of ancient darkness hadn't just been stirred beneath their feet. Michael stood slowly. "We," Warn them, he said, even if they don't believe us. They found a battered staircase leading upward, broken steps winding toward a heavy metal door. Sam forced it open with a grunt, revealing a narrow alley behind an abandoned building. Morning light filtered down through the misty air, painting the street in pale gray. Michael stepped out first, blinking against the weak sunlight. The world looked normal, cars passing, people walking, the city breathing, but he knew better. They all did. Chloe limped after him, and Sam pulled the door closed behind them. They stood there for a moment, uncertain. Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through the news. Sinkholes, power outages, strange disappearances. The signs were still there, if you knew how to look. Chloe touched his arm lightly. "It's not over, is it?" Michael shook his head. "No, it's sleeping again, for now." He tucked the camera under his jacket and turned toward the street. They would gather what they knew, tell whoever would listen. It was all they could do, but deep down, Michael feared it wouldn't be enough. Days passed. They met in secret, sharing footage, sketches, maps of the underground tunnels they had explored. Most people laughed them off, some called them crazy, a few listened, and then disappeared without a trace. Michael stayed awake most nights, listening to the faint vibrations in the floorboards, wondering if they were real or just in his mind. Chloe started having nightmares again, more vivid and violent than before. Sam talked about leaving the city altogether, but Michael knew it wouldn't matter. It wasn't just the city. The thing they had disturbed was spreading, slow, patient, inevitable. One evening, as Michael reviewed the footage alone in his apartment, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. In one of the frames, just for a split second, a figure stood behind them in the tunnel. Tall, thin, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at the camera. He froze, heart pounding. It hadn't been there when they filmed. It was closer now, watching, waiting. Michael slammed the laptop shut, heart racing. The apartment felt too small, too quiet. He pulled the blinds closed and double-checked the locks, but he knew it wouldn't help. Whatever had followed them out of the depths wasn't bound by walls or doors. It was patient. It had waited centuries. It could wait a little longer. Michael sat on the edge of his bed, hands shaking. He texted Chloe and Sam a single word. "It's here." A moment later, both responded with the same, "I know." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, listening. Somewhere deep beneath the city, the low hum began again, faint but unmistakable. The seal had cracked. Not broken completely, but enough. And whatever watched from the darkness was only getting stronger. Weeks later, life in the city seemed to return to normal. The news stopped reporting the strange disappearances. The sinkholes were patched. People forgot, as they always did. But Michael, Chloe, and Sam couldn't forget. They moved carefully through the world, always alert, always listening. Michael kept the camera close at all times, even though it showed nothing. At least, nothing during the day. At night, it was different. Static. Flickers of tall shadows in the corners, glimpses of places that shouldn't exist. They started noticing others, too. People whose eyes lingered too long, who smiled a little too widely, whose reflections didn't always match their movements. The city was sick, infected, and the infection was spreading silently, invisibly, like roots beneath the streets. They hadn't stopped it. They had only delayed the inevitable. One night, standing on a rooftop overlooking the city, Michael filmed the skyline. At first, everything seemed normal. Lights blinking, cars crawling through distant streets. But as he zoomed in, he saw them. Figures standing perfectly still atop distant buildings. Too far away for normal eyes to notice. Watching. Waiting. Chloe stepped beside him, her face pale. "What do we do now?" she asked. Michael lowered the camera, heart heavy. In the depths below, something stirred again, and this time, it wasn't going back to sleep. He turned off the camera slowly, his reflection in the lens warping into something unfamiliar. "We prepare," he said, "because this is just the beginning." Michael couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, the watchers on the rooftops, the hollow-eyed figures in the reflections. The city no longer felt like home. It felt like a cage. He spent the long hours of the night reviewing the footage, frame by frame, documenting every strange shape and anomaly. Chloe and Sam were doing the same from their own apartments, too afraid now to meet in person. The thing they had awoken was not dormant, it had simply adapted. Late one night, a new video appeared in their shared folder. Security footage from an abandoned part of the subway. At first, it showed nothing, just empty tunnels. Then, a door opened by itself, slow and deliberate, and from the blackness beyond, a shape crawled forward. Too thin, too fast, moving in jerks and spasms. Michael leaned closer to the screen, breath shallow. They hadn't sealed it away. They had only given it more ways to reach the surface. He forwarded the video to Chloe and Sam immediately, heart hammering in his chest. Within minutes, Chloe replied, "We need to get out now." Sam's message came seconds later. "Too late, look outside." Michael froze. Slowly, he turned toward his window. At first, he saw nothing but the empty street. Then, under the flickering glow of the streetlights, he spotted them. Dozens of figures, standing motionless. Their faces were indistinct, but their presence was unmistakable. They were waiting. Michael backed away from the window, panic rising. His phone buzzed again. "Meet at the old library, basement level." Chloe's message was curt, urgent. Michael grabbed his backpack, stuffing the camera and essential gear inside. He cast one last look around his apartment, knowing he might never see it again. The watchers didn't move as he slipped out the back door, but he could feel their hollow eyes tracking every step he took into the night. The streets were almost silent as Michael moved quickly through the back alleys, sticking to the shadows. Every so often he caught glimpses of the watchers, standing at intersections, perched atop buildings, their heads slowly turning to follow him. They didn't chase. They didn't speak, they only watched, and somehow that was worse. When he finally reached the old library, he found the front doors ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. Chloe and Sam were already waiting inside, crouched near the reception desk. Chloe's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a heavy crowbar. Sam held a flashlight and a battered metal case. "Downstairs," Chloe whispered. "There's an old archive room. It's protected, or at least it used to be." Michael nodded, and together they slipped through the ruined corridors, moving deeper into the library's forgotten guts. The further they descended, the colder it grew, until their breath misted in the stale air. Whatever had once been sealed away beneath the city hadn't forgotten them, and it wasn't finished. The basement was a maze of collapsed shelves, fallen beams, and forgotten relics. Dust hung in the air like mist, glowing faintly under the flashlight beams. At the far end of the hallway, they found the archive room, a heavy iron door marked with old symbols almost worn away by time. Chloe pressed her palm against it, muttering something under her breath. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a small chamber lined with stone walls. In the center stood a pedestal, much like the one they had found underground, but this one was different. It pulsed faintly with a warm golden light. Sam approached first, setting the metal case down carefully. "We brought it with us," he said, glancing nervously at Michael and Chloe. Michael opened his backpack and pulled out the cracked remains of the box they had used to seal the creature. The box was different now, darker, heavier, almost humming with malevolent energy. Chloe swallowed hard. "This time," she said, "we trap it properly, or we die trying." Michael placed the broken box carefully on the pedestal. The golden light flickered and dimmed, reacting to the dark presence within the relic. Chloe and Sam circled the room, tracing protective symbols on the floor with chalk and old dust scraped from the walls. The air grew heavier with every passing second, the pressure mounting against their chests like a rising tide. From somewhere above, they heard it, the watchers moving now. Their slow, deliberate footsteps creaked across the ruined library floors. Michael swallowed hard. "They know we're here," he whispered. Chloe finished the last symbol and stood back. "It has to be now," she said. Michael nodded and placed his hands on the box. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shock of cold tore through the room. The lights shuddered, and a deep guttural howl rose from the depths of the earth. The box split open along unseen seams, releasing a vortex of darkness that lashed at the walls and floor, tearing at reality itself. The trap had been sprung. Now they just had to survive it. The watchers burst into the hallway outside, their distorted shapes pressing against the iron door. The room shook violently as the vortex expanded, drawing the shadows toward the pedestal. Michael gritted his teeth, focusing all his energy on keeping the box open. Chloe chanted in a low, steady voice, reinforcing the symbols on the ground. Sam knelt by the door, holding it shut with all his strength. One by one, the watchers were pulled toward the trap, their forms twisting and howling as they were sucked into the swirling mass. The box hissed and shuddered, its surface cracking further. Michael felt something reach for him from the darkness, a whisper against his mind, offering promises, threats, visions of endless corridors and empty cities. He fought back with everything he had. With a final, blinding flash of light, the box snapped closed, the pedestal shattered, and the room fell into an eerie silence. They collapsed where they stood, gasping for breath, the iron door finally still behind them. For the first time in weeks, the city above was silent. They sat in the ruined archive room for a long time, too exhausted to move. Michael finally broke the silence, his voice raw. "Did it work?" Chloe stared at the shattered pedestal, the broken box lying dead and cold in the dust. "For now," she said quietly. Sam pushed himself upright, wincing from bruises and cuts he hadn't even realized he had. "We sealed the breach. That's something." Michael picked up the camera and checked the footage. The recording had survived, flickering, chaotic, but intact. Proof of what they had seen, of what they had fought. He tucked it carefully back into his backpack, feeling its weight against his spine. They climbed out of the archive room, into the ruined library, and out into the quiet dawn. The city stretched before them, silent, almost peaceful. But Michael knew it was only an illusion. They had plugged one hole, and sealed one breach. But the roots of the darkness ran deeper than the city, deeper than the earth itself. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. As they stood on the cracked sidewalk, Chloe pointed toward the skyline. Tiny, barely visible dark shapes perched atop distant rooftops, still and silent, waiting. Michael tightened the straps on his backpack and glanced at Chloe and Sam. They were tired, hurt, changed, but they were alive, for now. Chloe smiled grimly. "Say a song too, slut," she muttered, almost to herself. Michael chuckled once, a dry, humorless sound. "To be continued," he said. In the distance, a low hum began to rise again, so faint it could have been the wind, or the heartbeat of something far beneath their feet, waiting patiently for its next chance. They turned and disappeared into the awakening city, carrying the knowledge of what lurked below. Some battles had been won, but the true war for the surface had only just begun. Thank you for listening to The Depths Below, Echoes of the Forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales, because there's always more lurking beneath the surface.